Philip Henry Sheridan was a career United States Army officer and a Union general in the American Civil War. His career was noted for his rapid rise to Major General and his close association with General-in-chief Ulysses S. Grant, who transferred Sheridan from command of an infantry division in the Western Theater to lead the Cavalry Corps of the Army of the Potomac in the East. In 1864, he defeated Confederate forces in the Shenandoah Valley, and his destruction of the economic infrastructure of the valley, called the burning by residents, was one of the first uses of scorched earth tactics in the war. In 1865, his cavalry pursued Gen. Robert E. Lee and was instrumental in forcing his surrender at Appomattox. Sheridan fought in later years in the Indian Wars of the Great Plains. Both as a soldier and private citizen, he was instrumental in the development and protection of Yellowstone National Park. In 1883, Sheridan was appointed General-in-chief of the U.S. Army, and in 1888 he was promoted to the rank of General of the Army during the term of President Grover Cleveland. Early life and education. Sheridan claims he was born in Albany, New York, the third child of 6 by John and Mary Mina Sheridan, immigrants from the parish of Killincary, County Cavan, Ireland. He grew up in Somerset, Ohio. Fully grown, he reached only 165 centimeters tall, a stature that led to the nickname Little Phil. Abraham Lincoln described his appearance in a famous anecdote: a brown, chunky little chap with a long body, short legs, not enough neck to hang him, and such long arms that if his ankles itch he can scratch them without stooping. Sheridan worked as a boy in town general stores, and eventually as head clerk and bookkeeper for a dry goods store. In 1848, he obtained an appointment to the United States Military Academy from one of his customers, Congressman Thomas Ritchie. Ritchie's first candidate for the appointment was disqualified by failing an examination of mathematics skill and a poor attitude. In his third year at West Point, Sheridan was suspended for a year for fighting with a classmate, William R. Terrell. The previous day, Sheridan had threatened to run him through with a bayonet in reaction to a perceived insult on the parade ground. He graduated in 1853, 34th in his class of 52 cadets. Sheridan was commissioned as a brevet second lieutenant and was assigned to the 1st U.S. Infantry Regiment at Fort Duncan, Texas, then to the 4th U.S. Infantry at Fort Reading, California. Most of his service with the 4th U.S. was in the Pacific Northwest, starting with a topographical survey mission to the Willamette Valley in 1855, during which he became involved with the Yakima War and Rogue River Wars, gaining experience in leading small combat teams, being wounded, and some of the diplomatic skills needed for negotiating with Indian tribes. He lived with a mistress during part of his tour of duty, an Indian woman named Sidney-O, daughter of the chief of the Klickitat tribe. Sheridan neglected to mention this relationship in his memoirs, and a primary source notes that someone named Sidney-O died in 1847 at age 8. Before Sheridan arrived in Oregon, he was promoted to first lieutenant in March 1861, just before the Civil War, and to captain in May, immediately after Fort Sumter. Civil War. Western Theater. In the fall of 1861, Sheridan was ordered to travel to Jefferson Barracks, near St. Louis, Missouri, for assignment to the 13th U.S. Infantry. He departed from his command of Fort Yamhill, Oregon, by way of San Francisco, across the Isthmus of Panama, and through New York City to home in Somerset for a brief leave. On the way to his new post, he made a courtesy call to Marge. Gen. Henry W. Halleck in St. Louis, who commandeered his services to audit the financial records of his immediate predecessor, Marge. Gen. John C. Fremont, whose administration of the Department of the Missouri was tainted by charges of wasteful expenditures and fraud that left the state as of $12 million in debt. Sheridan sorted out the mess, impressing Halleck in the process. Much to Sheridan's dismay, Halleck's vision for Sheridan consisted of a continuing role as a staff officer. Nevertheless, Sheridan performed the task assigned to him and entrenched himself as an excellent staff officer in Halleck's view. In December, Sheridan was appointed Chief Commissary Officer of the Army of Southwest Missouri, but convinced the department commander, Halleck, to give him the position of Quartermaster General as well. In January 1862, he reported for duty at Marge. Gen. Samuel Curtis and served under him at the Battle of Pea Ridge. Sheridan soon discovered that officers were engaged in profiteering. They stole horses from civilians and demanded payment from Sheridan. He refused to pay for the stolen property and confiscated the horses for the use of Curtis' army. When Curtis ordered him to pay the officers, Sheridan brusquely retorted, "No authority can compel me to jayhawk or steal." Curtis had Sheridan arrested for insubordination, but Halleck's influence appears to have ended any formal proceedings. Sheridan performed aptly in his role under Curtis and now returned to Halleck's headquarters. He accompanied the army on the siege of Corinth and served as an assistant to the department's topographical engineer, but also made the acquaintance of Brig. Gen. William T. Sherman, who offered him the colonelcy of an Ohio infantry regiment. This appointment fell through, but Sheridan was subsequently aided by friends, who petitioned Michigan Governor Austin Blair on his behalf. Sheridan was appointed colonel of the 2nd Michigan Cavalry on May 27, 1862, despite having no experience in the mounted arm. A month later, Sheridan commanded his first forces in combat, leading a small brigade that included his regiment. At the Battle of Booneville, Mississippi, July 1, 1862, he held back several regiments of Brig. Gen. James R. Chalmers's Confederate cavalry, deflected a large flanking attack with a noisy diversion, and reported critical intelligence about enemy dispositions. His actions so impressed the division commanders, including Brig. Gen. William S. Rosecrans, that they recommended Sheridan's promotion to brigadier general. They wrote to Halleck, "Brigadiers scarce, good ones scarce. The undersigned respectfully beg that you will obtain the promotion of Sheridan. He is worth his weight in gold." The promotion was approved in September, but dated effective July 1 as a reward for his actions at Booneville. It was just after Booneville that one of his fellow officers gave him the horse that he named Rienzi, which he would ride throughout the war. Sheridan was assigned to command the 11th Division, 3rd Corps in Marge. Gen. Don Carlos Buell's Army of the Ohio. On October 8, 1862, Sheridan led his division in the Battle of Perryville. Under orders from Buell and his corps commander, Marge. Gen. Charles Gilbert, Sheridan sent Col. Daniel McCook's brigade to secure a water supply for the army. McCook drove off the Confederates and secured water for the parched Union troops at Doctors Creek. Gilbert ordered McCook not to advance any further and then rode to consult with Buell. Along the way, Gilbert ordered his cavalry to attack the Confederates in Dan McCook's front. Sheridan heard the gunfire and came to the front with another brigade. Although the cavalry failed to secure the heights in front of McCook, Sheridan's reinforcements drove off the Southerners. Gilbert returned and ordered Sheridan to return to McCook's original position. Sheridan's aggressiveness convinced the opposing Confederates under Marge. Gen. Leonidas Polk that they should remain on the defensive. His troops repulsed Confederate attacks later that day, but did not participate in the heaviest fighting of the day, which occurred on the Union left. On December 31, 1862, the first day of the Battle of Stones River, Sheridan anticipated a Confederate assault and positioned his division in preparation for it. His division held back the Confederate onslaught on his front until their ammunition ran out and they were forced to withdraw. This action was instrumental in giving the Union Army time to rally at a strong defensive position. For his actions, he was promoted to Major General on April 10, 1863. In 6 months, he had risen from captain to major general. The Army of the Cumberland recovered from the shock of Stones River and prepared for its summer offensive against Confederate General Braxton Bragg. Sheridan's division participated in the advance against Bragg in Rosecrans's brilliant Tullahoma campaign, and was the lead division to enter the town of Tullahoma. On the second day of the Battle of Chickamauga, September 20, 1863, Rosecrans was shifting Sheridan's division behind the Union battle line when Bragg launched an attack into a gap in the Union line. Sheridan's division made a gallant stand on Lytle Hill against an attack by the Confederate Corps of Lt. Gen. James Longstreet, but was swamped by retreating Union soldiers. The Confederates drove Sheridan's division from the field in confusion. He gathered as many men as he could and withdrew toward Chattanooga, rallying troops along the way. Learning of Marge. Gen. George H. Thomas's 14th Corps stand on Snodgrass Hill, Sheridan ordered his division back to the fighting, but they took a circuitous route and did not participate in the fighting as some histories claim. His return to the battlefield ensured that he did not suffer the fate of Rosecrans, who rode off to Chattanooga leaving the army to its fate, and was soon relieved of command. During the Battle of Chattanooga at Missionary Ridge on November 25, 1863, Sheridan's division and others in George Thomas's army broke through the Confederate lines in a wild charge that exceeded the orders and expectations of Thomas and Ulysses S. Grant. Just before his men stepped off, Sheridan told them, "Remember Chickamauga," and many shouted its name as they advanced as ordered to a line of rifle pits in the front. Faced with enemy fire from above, however, they continued up the ridge. Sheridan spotted a group of Confederate officers outlined against the crest of the ridge and shouted, "Here's at you!" An exploding shell sprayed him with dirt and he responded, "That's damn ungenerous. I shall take those guns for that." The Union charge broke through the Confederate lines on the ridge and Bragg's army fell into retreat. Sheridan impulsively ordered his men to pursue Bragg to the Confederates' supply depot at Chickamauga Station, but called them back when he realized that his was the only command so far forward. General Grant reported after the battle to Sheridan's prompt movement, "The Army of the Cumberland and the nation are indebted for the bulk of the capture of prisoners, artillery, and small arms that day. Except for his prompt pursuit, so much in this way would not have been accomplished." Overland Campaign. Gen. Ulysses S. Grant, newly promoted to be General-in-chief of all the Union armies, summoned Sheridan to the Eastern Theater to command the Cavalry Corps of the Army of the Potomac. Unbeknownst to Sheridan, he was actually Grant's second choice after Marge. Gen. William B. Franklin, but Grant agreed to a suggestion about Sheridan from Chief of Staff Henry W. Halleck. After the war, and in his memoirs, Grant claimed that Sheridan was the very man he wanted for the job. Sheridan arrived at the headquarters of the Army of the Potomac on April 5, 1864, less than a month before the start of Grant's massive overland campaign against Robert E. Lee. In the early battles of the campaign, Sheridan's cavalry was relegated by Army Commander Marge. Gen. George G. Meade to its traditional additional role, screening, reconnaissance, and guarding trains and rear areas, much to Sheridan's frustration. In the Battle of the Wilderness, the dense forested terrain prevented any significant cavalry role. As the army swung around the Confederate right flank in the direction of Spotsylvania Courthouse, Sheridan's troopers failed to clear the road from the Wilderness, losing engagements along the Plank Road on May 5 and Todd's Tavern on May 6 through May 8, allowing the Confederates to seize the critical crossroads before the Union infantry could arrive. Sheridan in the Overland Campaign. When Meade quarreled with Sheridan for not performing his duties of screening and reconnaissance as ordered, Sheridan told Meade that he could whip Stuart if Meade let him. Meade reported the conversation to Grant, who replied, "Well, he generally knows what he is talking about. Let him start right out and do it." Meade deferred to Grant's judgment and issued orders to Sheridan to proceed against the enemy's cavalry, and from May 9 through May 24, sent him on a raid toward Richmond, directly challenging the Confederate cavalry. The raid was less successful than hoped, although his raid managed to mortally wound Confederate cavalry commander Marge, Gen. J.E.B. Stuart at Yellow Tavern on May 11 and B. Marge, Gen. Fitzhugh at Meadow Bridge on May 12. The raid never seriously threatened Richmond, and it left Grant without cavalry intelligence for Spotsylvania and North Anna. Historian Gordon C. Rear wrote, "By taking his cavalry from Spotsylvania Courthouse, Sheridan severely handicapped Grant in his battles against Lee. The Union Army was deprived of his eyes and ears during a critical juncture in the campaign, and Sheridan's decision to advance boldly to the Richmond defenses smacked of unnecessary showboating that jeopardized his command." Rejoining the Army of the Potomac, Sheridan's cavalry fought inconclusively at Hawes Shop, a battle with heavy casualties that allowed the Confederate cavalry to obtain valuable intelligence about Union dispositions. They seized the critical crossroads that triggered the Battle of Cold Harbor and withstood a number of assaults until reinforced. Grant then ordered Sheridan on a raid to the northwest to break the Virginia Central Railroad and to link up with the Shenandoah Valley Army of Marge, Gen. David Hunter. He was intercepted by the Confederate cavalry under Marge, Gen. Wade Hampton at the Battle of Trevilian Station, where in the largest all-cavalry battle of the war, he achieved tactical success on the first day, but suffered heavy casualties during multiple assaults on the second. He withdrew without achieving his assigned objectives. On his return march, he once again encountered the Confederate cavalry at Samaria Church on June 24, where his men suffered significant casualties, but successfully protected the Union supply wagons they were escorting. History draws decidedly mixed opinions on the success of Sheridan in the Overland Campaign, in no small part because the very clear Union victory at Yellow Tavern, highlighted by the death of Jeb Stuart, tends to overshadow other actions and battles. In Sheridan's report of the Cavalry Corps' actions in the campaign, discussing the strategy of cavalry fighting cavalry, he wrote, "The result was constant success and the almost total annihilation of the rebel cavalry. We marched when and where we pleased. We were always the attacking party, and always successful." A contrary view has been published by historian Eric J. Wittenberg, who notes that of 4 major strategic raids and 13 major cavalry engagements of the Overland and Richmond-Petersburg campaigns, only Yellow Tavern can be considered a Union victory, with Hawes Shop, Trevilian Station, Meadow Bridge, Samaria Church, and Wilson counts defeats in which some of Sheridan's forces barely avoided destruction. Army of the Shenandoah. Throughout the war, the Confederacy sent armies out of Virginia through the Shenandoah Valley to invade Maryland and Pennsylvania and threaten Washington, D.C. Lt. Gen. Jubal A. Early, following the same pattern in the Valley campaigns of 1864, and hoping to distract Grant from the siege of Petersburg, attacked Union forces near Washington and raided several towns in Pennsylvania. Grant, reacting to the political commotion caused by the invasion, organized the Middle Military Division, whose field troops were known as the Army of the Shenandoah. He considered various candidates for command, including George Meade, William B. Franklin, and David Hunter, with the latter two intended for the military division while Sheridan would command the army. All of these choices were rejected by either Grant of the War Department and, over the objection of Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton, who believed him to be too young for such a high post, Sheridan took command in both roles at Harper's Ferry on August 7, 1864. His mission was not only to defeat Early's army and to close off the northern invasion route, but to deny the Shenandoah Valley as a productive agricultural region to the Confederacy. Grant told Sheridan, "The people should be informed that so long as an army can subsist among them, recurrences of these raids must be expected, and we are determined to stop them at all hazards. Give the enemy no rest. Do all the damage to railroads and crops you can. Carry off stock of all descriptions, and Negroes, so as to prevent further planting. If the war is to last another year, we want the Shenandoah Valley to remain a barren waste." Sheridan got off to a slow start, needing time to organize and to react to reinforcements reaching Early. Grant ordered him not to launch an offensive with the advantage against you, and yet Grant expressed frustration with Sheridan's lack of progress. The armies remained unengaged for over a month, causing political consternation in the North as the 1864 election drew near. The two generals conferred on September 16 at Charlestown and agreed that Sheridan would begin his attacks within 4 days. On September 19, Sheridan beat Early's much smaller army at 3rd Winchester and followed up on September 22 with a victory at Fisher's Hill. As Early attempted to regroup, Sheridan began the punitive operations of his mission, sending his cavalry as far south as Waynesboro to seize or destroy livestock and provisions, and to burn barns, mills, factories, and railroads. Sheridan's men did their work relentlessly and thoroughly, rendering over 400 miles squared uninhabitable. The destruction presaged the scorched earth tactics of Sherman's march to the sea through Georgia, deny an army a base from which to operate and bring the effects of war home to the populations supporting it. The residents referred to this widespread destruction as the burning. The Confederates were not idle during this period, and Sheridan's men were plagued by guerrilla raids by partisan Ranger Col. John S. Mosby. Although Sheridan assumed that Jubal Early was effectively out of action and he considered withdrawing his army to rejoin Grant at Petersburg, Early received reinforcements and, on October 19 at Cedar Creek, launched a well-executed surprise attack while Sheridan was absent from his army, 10 miles away at Winchester. Hearing the distant sounds of artillery, he rode aggressively to his command. He reached the battlefield about 10:30 a.m. and began to rally his men. Fortunately for Sheridan, Early's men were too occupied to take notice. They were hungry and exhausted and fell out to pillage the Union camps. Sheridan's actions are generally credited with saving the day. Early had been dealt his most significant defeat, rendering his army almost incapable of future offensive action. Sheridan received a personal letter of thanks from Abraham Lincoln and a promotion to Major General in the regular army as of November 8, 1864, making him the fourth-ranking general in the army, after Grant, Sherman, and Meade. Grant wrote to Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton after he ordered a 100-gun salute to celebrate Sheridan's victory at Cedar Creek, turning what bid fair to be a disaster into a glorious victory. Stamps Sheridan, what I have always thought him, one of the ablest of generals. A famous poem, Sheridan's Ride, was written by Thomas Buchanan Reed to commemorate the general's return to the battle. Sheridan reveled in the fame that Reed's poem brought him, renaming his horse Rienzi to Winchester, based on the poem's refrain, Winchester, 20 miles away. The poem was widely used in Republican campaign efforts, and some have credited Abraham Lincoln's margin of victory to it. As for Lincoln himself, the president, pleased at Sheridan's performance as a commander, wrote to Sheridan and playfully confessed his reassessment of the relatively short officer when this peculiar war began. I thought a cavalryman should be 6 feet 4 inches, but I have changed my mind. 5'4" will do in a pinch. Sheridan spent the next several months occupied with light skirmishing and fighting guerrillas, although Grant continued his exhortations for Sheridan to move south and break the Virginia Central Railroad supplying Petersburg. Sheridan resisted. Wright's 6th Corps returned to join Grant in November. Sheridan's remaining men, primarily cavalry and artillery, finally moved out of the winter quarters on February 27, 1865, and headed east. The orders from Gen. Grant were largely discretionary. They were to destroy the Virginia Central Railroad and the James River Canal, capture Lynchburg if practicable, then either join William T. Sherman in North Carolina or return to Winchester. Appomattox Campaign. Sheridan interpreted Grant's orders liberally, and instead of heading to North Carolina in March 1865, he moved to rejoin the Army of the Potomac at Petersburg. He wrote in his memoirs, feeling that the war was nearing its end, I desired my cavalry to be in at the death. His finest service of the Civil War was demonstrated during his relentless pursuit of Robert E. Lee's army, effectively managing the most crucial aspects of the Appomattox Campaign for Grant. On the way to Petersburg, at the Battle of Waynesboro, March 2, he trapped the remainder of Early's army and 1,500 soldiers surrendered. On April 1, he cut off Gen. Lee's lines of support at Five Forks, forcing Lee to evacuate Petersburg. During this battle he ruined the military career of Marge. Gen. Governor K. Warren by removing him from command of the 5th Corps under circumstances that a court of inquiry later determined were unjustified. Sheridan's aggressive and well-executed performance at the Battle of Silas Creek on April 6 effectively sealed the fate of Lee's army, capturing over 20% of his remaining men. President Lincoln sent Grant a telegram on April 7. Gen. Sheridan says, if the thing is pressed, I think that Lee will surrender. Let the thing be pressed. At Appomattox Courthouse, April 9, 1865, Sheridan blocked Lee's escape, forcing the surrender of the Army of Northern Virginia later that day. Grant summed up Little Phil's performance in these final days. I believe General Sheridan has no superior as a general, either living or dead, and perhaps not an equal.